guess in some ways the ending makes sense if you like kind of squint and turn your head. Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Jessie, and today I have my April reading wrap up for you. Before I get started on my actual wrap up though, I just want to remind you to take a moment to please like this video and subscribe to my channel to make finding my content every Tuesday and every other Thursday just a little bit easier on yourselves, as well as check out the links in my description box. My social media is linked there, but I also have a couple of social justice links for issues I find important linked near the top as well. April was kind of a weird reading month for me. It wasn't bad as far as quantity goes, but quality wise it wasn't the best. I finished 7 books and most of them were pretty good, but I also DNF'd 4 books. And so that kind of just threw me off. I was in and out of reading slumps throughout the month, so just April was my roughest reading month of the year so far. My April TBR included 5 books: Yolk by Mary H.K. Choi, All the Tides of Fate by Adeline Grace, The Final Revival of Opal and Nev by Donnie Walton, Cast in Firelight by Dana Swift, and Disfigured by Amanda Leduc. The only book on my TBR I did not at least start was Disfigured by Amanda Leduc. Like I said, April was kind of a weird reading month, and I just never could bring myself to getting around to starting it, and I tried other nonfiction books and I just never had any luck, so I decided I would just not start that book at all in April. In April, I also DNF'd the highest amount of books I've DNF'd in the past 2 years. I actually DNF'd 4 books, and just that kind of, I guess, threw my confidence for my reading in April. I had a tough time. And I guess I'll talk about the books I DNF'd in the order I DNF'd them. The first book I DNF'd in April was Cast in Firelight by Dana Swift. I think I was around 60-ish pages into this book when I DNF'd it, and I DNF'd it after learning that, you know, the author's a white woman and the main characters are really heavily inspired by Indian culture, and it just kind of made me uncomfortable to read a story so heavily inspired by Indian culture written by someone who's not of that culture. And I think own voices is especially important whenever it comes to books regarding culture, ethnicity, and race. I don't know, I got uncomfortable with the idea of reading this once I was made aware of that, and so I DNF'd this book. I will maybe pick up more books by Dana Swift in the future as long as they don't have similar issues, because the writing was interesting and I was intrigued by the story, but I just was getting uncomfortable once I learned that fact. The next book I DNF'd was Group by Christy Tate, and this is one I started the audiobook of on Libby, and it was interesting at first, but also it just felt so incredibly unrealistic. Group is about Christy Tate's own experience in group therapy, and just her experience with group therapy just, like I said, sounds unrealistic. Her therapist apparently doesn't believe in confidentiality between patients. He can't say anything, but the patients can gossip all they want with each other and with different groups, and he even kind of encourages it, which, just like I said, it just all felt so unbelievable, and I just kept waiting for it to get better, and it just never did. And I just ended up DNFing it. I wasn't really enjoying it. It was getting to where I didn't really want to pick it up because, I don't know, I just didn't like it. I didn't really particularly like Christy Tate as a narrator either, and I know it's her own story, so I kind of feel bad saying that, but it's just, go away. But just as a narrator, I didn't really enjoy her personality or anything. I didn't really enjoy the tone of the book, and it just wasn't it for me. I also ended up DNFing The Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine and Aaron. This book, I guess, talks about, you know, the traits of a highly sensitive person and how to live with those traits and, I guess, make your life more beneficial to yourself. And the idea is really interesting. It's just, at the time I read this book, I was having trouble focusing on it. I wasn't particularly interested at that time. This is a book that I could see myself going back to give another shot. I was reading along to the audiobook, and I don't know if maybe I would have done better if I had just read the physical book to begin with, or what, but it just wasn't working for me, and so I DNF'd it. The final book I DNF'd in April was The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas, and it is a novella set about the Throne of Glass series before the series starts. And I guess it's like Selena's backstory, and it was okay, but I do think I may have had a better time with it if I had read the original Throne of Glass series first. Maybe I would have had a better time, but also thinking about it, I'm not sure if I would have liked it even if I had read and enjoyed Throne of Glass series first, just because I'm not sure that I'm actually interested in novellas. I haven't really ever read any novella sets. I typically don't gravitate towards them. Maybe it's the fact that it was a novella or a set of novellas I didn't like. I don't know. I still plan on reading the actual Throne of Glass series just to see if maybe that will be a little bit better for me. And now we're on to the books that I actually finished in April, and I will actually be talking about these books in the order from highest ratings and favorites to the lowest ratings. I had a little bit of a difficult time picking my favorite book in April, but I ultimately picked Yolk by Mary H.K. Choi, and this one was a 5-star rating for me. Yolk follows 2 sisters, Jane and June. June is diagnosed with cancer, and She commits insurance fraud with Jane's school insurance in order to get her cancer treated. Jane eventually finds out and they try to play along, and they're also living with like this like estrangement between them. Something happened and they're now estranged, and June's cancer brings them closer together. And I love this book so much. I enjoyed that most of the story focused on Jane and June's relationships as sisters. I really enjoyed that part of the story. And yeah, Jane had a little bit of like a romance, but it wasn't that important, and I kind of appreciated that. I appreciated so much learning about Jane and June's relationship. I enjoyed seeing them as characters. I enjoyed seeing how Jane saw June and how she perceived June to see her versus eventually finding out how June actually sees her. And I enjoyed like how their relationship changed throughout the book. I enjoyed their backstory. I enjoyed this book so much. It was so good. I really enjoyed Jane's narration. She was a little crude at times and kind of blunt, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. But this is a really great book, and I highly recommend you read it if you're interested in a book about sisterly relationships and I guess overcoming whatever their issues are to work together and be on good terms again. But it was a really great book. Lost in the Neverwoods by Aiden Thomas was another 5-star read for me. This was a great Peter Pan retelling. I think some people may have had issues with it because it was a dark Peter Pan retelling. It wasn't super true to the original Peter Pan story, but I like that it wasn't super true to the story. I like that it was more so inspired by Peter Pan than a strict retelling. The story follows Wendy Darling. She and her brothers went missing 5 years ago, and only she came back, and now kids are starting to go missing again. And these police officers keep going to her to figure out, is she, remembering something she's not telling them? Does she know what's actually happening to these kids? And then she comes across Peter Pan, and they work together to figure out where these kids are. And the end is definitely sad, and it's definitely sad, but it was such a satisfying and good story. It was so good. It was such an interesting read. I really enjoyed this take on Peter Pan. I will say that the pace is a little bit more on the slow side, so definitely be aware of that going into it, especially if you read Cemetery Boys first. Be aware that this is a completely different tone and pace than Cemetery Boys. And Cemetery Boys was a little bit faster paced. I would say it was a little bit more upbeat, whereas this one is slower paced, and it definitely has like a more dark and potentially even angsty tone to it, but it was really good, and I really enjoyed this book. The final revival of Opal and Nev was a 4-star read for me. This was an amazing book as well. I really enjoyed the interview format. This book is kind of written as like an interview style book about this band called Opal and Nev, who are getting ready for a revival in I think 2016, 2017. They were a kind of upcoming popular rock band in the like mid 70s, I think. Another band brought a Confederate flag to this concert, and then Opal protested it, and then just things went downhill from there. And so I really enjoyed learning what actually happened, who did what, why, what happened, and everything. And then another really interesting aspect is the editor of Opal and Nev's story, the person who is telling it and writing the story in order for it to be sold as a book to promote Opal and Nev's revival tour. This person actually has a very interesting tie to the story that at times I didn't quite understand, and it kind of frustrated me because I was like, oh, is this ethical for this person to be one writing the story? But then again, if I was in this person's shoes, I would want to be the one writing the story as well. I would want to be the one getting to tell Opal and Nev's story just because of this person's connection to the story. And it was really interesting. There was one part in the middle after there's this big reveal where for like maybe 30 or 40 pages, I couldn't quite tell what the story was doing. But after that, it was amazing. It was great. I really enjoyed this book. And this book actually makes me want to try Daisy Jones and the Six, which I know a lot of people have already read. But I know that book is another one written in interview format, so I would like to try that format with another book. I also read The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, and I rated it 4 stars, and I read this as part of the Cruel Prince read-along hosted by the Roomies Digest, and I believe Bonbon Reads. If I have their channel name wrong, I'll have it, right here. That way, you know what to look for. They're hosting a read-along where each month they read the next book in the series. And so I read The Cruel Prince. It was a 4-star read. It was interesting and it was good, but I kind of had mixed feelings about it. This book follows Jude. She is a human girl who was brought to the fairy world as a young kid after her parents were murdered. And she lives with her 2 sisters, Taryn and Vivi. Vivi is actually half fairy and Taryn is her twin and she's human. And Jude is also like being severely picked on by the other fairies. I mean, all of her sisters are, but she, I guess, is more so, including the Prince Carden. And something happens and Jude ends up becoming, I guess, a spy and trying to figure out some secrets, and just a lot of stuff goes down. The main thing that I have an issue with in this book is Jude or Carden's bullying of Jude. it kind of takes it too far at times. And like, I know this is one of the books that's touted as like one of the great enemies to lovers books, or at least it is on Bookstagram and TikTok and stuff. And so like, I'm interested, but I'm not sure if I'm comfortable. Like, I don't like that I'm interested because of everything, but this was a really interesting book. I'm enjoying it, and I'm actually really excited to start The Wicked King sometime this next month. I also reread All the Stars and Teeth by Adeline Grace, and this was a 4-star read for me. I kept the 4-star rating from my first read. This book follows Princess Amora, and she has this magic called soul magic, where she's able to control souls or learn about souls or something. And it kind of is only allowed by her family. Only her family is allowed to have it. And then there's all these other kinds of magic, but as far as everyone knows, people are only allowed to have one type of magic. And now there's this new type of magic kind of coming about, and so Amora is supposed to prove her magic at this ceremony, and it doesn't go well, so she's kind of kidnapped, not really kidnapped, but like whisked away by this pirate named Bastion, who was trying to warn the king about this new magic. And Bastion, and her fiance Varric all end up going on this adventure to figure out what's going on. And in the end, they come back and things work out however they work out. I actually enjoyed this book more on the reread. I picked up on hints about something about Bastion more so than I picked up on them the first time. I, in general, just really enjoyed the story, and I had a lot of fun with it. I do wish that the ending had tied up differently though, just because I didn't love the second book as much. So I also read All the Tides of Fate by Adeline Grace, and I rated this one 3.5 stars. On Storygraph, it will be rated 3.5 stars, but on Goodreads, it will have a 4-star rating because typically I prefer to round up rather than round down. This one takes place after the events of the first book. Amora is now queen, and she has her own curse on her, and she ends up going around the islands with her original crew to figure out how to break this curse. And I think there was some important parts of this book, like Amora learning how to deal with the grief after the events of the first book and move on from that. But also just, I didn't enjoy this book as much. The actual story just felt like one huge filler story, even though there's nothing to fill in because it's the end of the series, or it's the end of the duology. I don't know, it felt like a big filler story, and it didn't feel as important as it should have felt to me. I did enjoy getting to spend more time with the characters, especially Amora and Bastion, but I did not particularly like the way it ended. I mean, I guess in some ways the ending made sense if you like kind of squint and turn your head, but I didn't like the ending very much. Like I said, this book wasn't bad by any means. I'm sure plenty of other people would like it. It just wasn't it for me, and I kind of wish that the first book had wrapped up nice and neatly, and that had just been a standalone. Like I said, I enjoyed getting to spend more time with the characters, but the actual story and the ending weren't it for me. My least favorite book I read in April was The Duke and I by Julia Quinn, and it is the first Bridgerton book. I ended up rating it 2 stars. So I went into Bridgerton noting about the big controversial thing that happens approximately 75% into the book and the show. And, you know, I still went into it hoping that maybe I could not necessarily overlook it, but maybe the rest of the story would be good enough to balance it out for me, and it just wasn't. I was okay with the story. I wasn't loving it, but I didn't really particularly dislike it. And then I got to the 75% mark, and that big thing that happens between Daphne and Simon happened, and that just kind of threw all the good things that I was liking down the drain. I think the book, if the big thing that happened hadn't happened, I think if that hadn't happened, I think the book could have easily been, 3.5, maybe even a 4-star read if the ending was really good. But I just wasn't happy with how that was handled. I think it was unnecessary, and I don't know. Like I said, I knew about it, so I'm not sure, why it bothered me. I know why it bothered me. But, I had hopes that maybe the book could still be good, even though I knew what happened that I didn't like. So I watched the show, too, and I liked most of the show up until the 6th episode. I think the show is definitely more interesting. But I did appreciate getting to see into Daphne's and Simon's thought processes and, seeing how they actually thought of things, how they were making plans and stuff. But overall, it was just a meh book. I haven't quite decided if I'm going to read the next book. I think it's The Viscount Who Loved Me. I think it's Anthony's story. I'm interested, but I don't know if I'm interested enough to get to it anytime soon. Anyways, those were all the books I read, did not read, and did not finish in April. Let me know how April was as a reading month for yourself, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.